happened about 13,000 years ago. Joining us this morning to tell us about these new findings regarding what might have happened and how those findings are being interpreted are Luann Becker, who is an associate researcher with the Institute for Crustal Studies at the University of California in Santa Barbara, Alan West, who is with Geoscience Consulting in Dewey, Arizona, Richard Firestone, who is a staff scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory in Berkeley, California, and Professor James Kennett of the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Starting with Dr. Firestone, I believe. I will have each speaker give a presentation of about 5 minutes. And because of the number of panelists up here this morning, I ask that you please keep your remarks brief. When all the speakers are finished, we'll open the floor to questions from members of the press.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you all for coming. We're talking about something I think is pretty exciting, at least to me, I hope to you as well, about an impact that we have found evidence for that occurred about 12,900 years ago, give or take 100 years or so. So I'm Rick Firestone, and Alan West will talk in a bit. I did a lot of chemistry on this, and I've been involved in this project for about 8 years, 9 years, with a fellow named Bill Topping who really started me on this and is still involved. Alan was our field man, got out there and took all the samples and dug in the dirt and figured out how to find a lot. Can you hear this? I guess. Okay, anyhow, Alan got a lot of the samples that we have studied and has figured out an awful lot of not only how to analyze these samples, but how to understand these samples. He's an encyclopedia of information. Jim Kennett got involved in this later on. He'll explain to you why this is important to the world and the Younger Dryas. And Luann Becker, who also got involved more recently, will tell you a lot of interesting stories about fullerenes and carbon that we find in these samples. So this is not the event. There were no cameras there at the time. Okay, so we went to many sites and around the country. These are the research sites that we studied, including one in Belgium. And you can see there's a wide range of sites we studied. All of these sites are related to a particular time frame, either by the existence of Clovis material or a black mat, which is found at many of these sites. You can see the black mat here at a site called Murray Springs. This black mat actually conforms over fossils that are found at this site of extinct mammoths. And after 12,900, which is the start of this black mat, which actually is very dark here but continues up much higher, there are no evidence of any more mammoths or Clovis people or anything from that era. It appears that this is a fine line that separates past events and future events. And inside this line, between the fossils and the black mat, we find a layer that I would call an ejecta layer that is available at all of these sites. And I'll tell you a few of the things we find in this layer. We find something called microspherules. These are metallic spherules. If they all look the same, it's because they are essentially all the same. We find a lot of magnetic grains as well. These are separated magnetically. Alan will tell you about how we get some of these samples out of the mat. So this is a traditional ejecta layer. Many of these have been seen in the past. This is a different ejecta layer because the chemistry is different. I'll go into that in a little bit. But it is basically, the microspherules don't have any way of being produced, at least in quantity, across such a large area except by an impact. We find something unusual called carbon spherules. The carbon spherules are vesicular. They have all little cellular holes in them. They contain nothing but carbon and water, essentially. The carbon spherules also contain nanodiamonds. That's another thing that comes from space, not from Earth. We find glass-like carbon, these things that look like melted pieces of taffy, carbon that has been heated so hot that it melted and became glassy. And these also have nanodiamonds in it. And as Luann will tell you, they have fullerenes in it. And the fullerenes are enriched in helium-3, which is a rare isotope of helium, which is abundant in outer space, but not on Earth. We have other unusual things. Of course, we have soot, we have charcoal. Those are more common things, probably from very intense fires. And we have copal or amber, depending on what you call it, spherules that we find in these sites. We don't know why they're there, but they're also associated with these events. So these things tend to be found at all the sites. Alan will give you more information about exactly what we find. And we find this unusual chemistry. This is the first time that prompt gamma activation analysis has been used to analyze meteoritics. It's a relatively new method of analysis that's sensitive to all elements. And I do this in Budapest. I've done this for many years in Budapest. We also use traditional neutron activation analysis. And so we've analyzed these ejecta layers, and one of the things we find is excess iridium concentrations. We don't know for sure how high they are. They seem to be quite a bit higher than terrestrial backgrounds. Iridium is a marker for extraterrestrial impacts. We also find high titanium concentrations. That's never been seen before, but we find this in both the microspherules and the ejecta itself. This is common throughout this layer. It's something new. We think probably this is a comet. Nobody knows what's in the middle of a comet, and this may be what's in at least some comets. We find excess of the isotope potassium-40. That can only happen in space. It's been seen in meteorites. It's not seen on Earth. Potassium-40's abundance on Earth is constant, but in our samples, it's elevated. And so the composition of the ejecta layer is very different from the Earth's crust. In fact, the only thing we could find similar to it is the lunar procellarum creep. This is the sediments that were brought back by the Apollo astronauts. And it's a very small part of the moon, and it has similar chemistry. Now, I'm not going to say that this meteor came from the moon, but it's an extraordinary coincidence that it has this, that this is the only thing we've been able to find that's at all similar to the material we find in this ejecta layer, at least the metallic material. Okay, so basically our conclusions are that there was a major impact that occurred over North America. It most likely caused megafaunal extinctions and the onset of the Younger Dryas cooling. These are things that Jim will tell you more about, but these are all coincident to the impact event. And we think that the impact is most likely an airburst over the ice sheet near the Great Lakes, and that may have destroyed the ice sheet and created the Younger Dryas and other associated events. Now, in some sense, an airburst is similar to what happened in Tunguska. Some of you may know that event in 1908, where it destroyed 2,000 square kilometers of Russian forest and was seen all over Europe. Now, the impactor we think is a comet, but like I said, it's remarkably similar to material from the moon, so there is a big mystery there of what it is, and we see the soot and charcoal, so we know there were massive fires. These fires and the dust from the event probably caused a large fraction of the cooling that occurred after this event. Earth was warming, and then it suddenly went back into a cooling period, the Younger Dryas, for 1,000 years, and the real question is this going to happen again? How important is this to our understanding of climate in general? So I'll turn this over to Alan, and maybe we'll just switch seats.
This is a little different map of what Rick just showed that indicates the extent of the event. I think that's one of the unusual things that we found is how widespread this was. You can see that the first sampling that we took was in Michigan, but by the time we were through, we had gone into Alberta, northern part of Alberta, around Edmonton, 3 sites up in Alberta, 1 in Manitoba, several in offshore California, 1 in Arizona, 1 in New Mexico, quite a few in the Carolinas. And then furthest reach was all the way to Belgium. Now, we don't know whether the event covered that complete area or not, or whether this was just part of the plume, but at any rate, we do find these markers, these cosmic markers, at every one of the spots where these dots are, and we have found some of them as far away as Belgium. One of the main sites that we looked at was called Blackwater Draw, and Blackwater Draw is what's called the type site for the Clovis point. And those are 4 or 5 Clovis points that were found right at Blackwater.